I will be listening while driving. Uh, as many of you know, my name is Right Worshipful Rafael Preza. Tonight, our symposium is brought to you by the 5th Manhattan District and legendsofthecraft.com. As you know, Legends of the Craft is it's a group of brothers, worshipful brother Kofi, uh, very worshipful Naeem Christopher, and myself. Uh, we comprise Legends of the Craft, and we have many other things coming in the future. The theme of our symposium this evening is Journey into the Masonic Mind. The topic for tonight is Contemplative Masonry, Basic Applications of Mindfulness, Meditation, and Imagery for the Craft. And our speaker tonight is Brother Chuck Dunning. Before Brother Chuck Dunning speaks, a little bit about him. He is an advocate, facilitator, trainer, and consultant in contemplative practice. With more than 30 years in the professional field of higher education and mental health, as well as in Masonry and other currents in the Western esoteric traditions. Chuck's consistent commitment is to the actual practice of contemplative disciplines to facilitate and enhance experiences of personal growth, social well-being, and spiritual initiation and transformation. And with that, my brothers and guests present, please, Brother Chuck Dunning.
There we go. All right. Well, we've had our share of technical difficulties already this evening, and I hope that we've got them all worked out. So I think as many of you may know, the title that you saw for this evening is the title of my book. My first book. I've got a second book that should be coming out fairly soon called The Contemplative Lodge, a manual for Masons doing inner work together. Because my first book was so focused on individual contemplative work, as I went around and talked with people, Masons, and did workshops and so on, and facilitated contemplative activities, a lot of brothers were giving me the feedback of, this is wonderful. We would like more instruction, more guidance on how we can do contemplative work together. And so that's what brought about the next book. I want to, instead of kind of going through a review of the book itself, I want to do my presentation tonight on kind of the underlying theme, I guess you would say, of contemplative work in Masonry as I see it, and how that works into everything that we do, particularly in the Craft Lodge. And so the title of this particular talk is Masonry's Contemplative Path Toward Wholeness. And I'd like to begin with a disclaimer that I think is always important for me to state, and that is that the things that I'm going to be saying tonight are my insights and interpretations of Masonry. And it's important for us to remember that we don't have anybody that speaks for the craft as a whole. We are encouraged to do speculation and interpretation of our rituals, but nobody speaks for anybody else. And so anything that I have to say that you find useful, then I'm happy about that, and I encourage you to use it as you would. But anything that doesn't strike right with you, then please feel free to disregard it. And I'm also going to be speaking about material from all 3 degrees of the Craft Lodge, but it's going to be from the monitors. So even if I'm talking about things that maybe EAs and fellow crafts haven't been exposed to, it will be monitorial material, and therefore I won't be disclosing too much, but only those things that are really central to what we're talking about, what I'm going to be talking about tonight, and this theme of the Masonic mind. So as I said, the title of my talk is Masonry's Contemplative Path Toward Wholeness, and I want to deliver this presentation in a contemplative manner, one that will help us look deeper into the meanings and relationships of the title's parts, and thereby gain a greater appreciation for the whole idea and how we can benefit from it. We'll do this by working backward through the 5 words of the title, and this is a contemplative method of working with written material that I learned from one of my teachers. I'm going to bring up a slideshow to help facilitate that. And Kofi, if you could give me access to that, that'd be great.
Give me 1 second. I'm setting up right now.
All right. In the meantime, I just everybody for making some time to listen to me talk tonight. I hope that it's worth your while, and I'm going to do my best to make it so.
You're good to go, Chuck.
Thank you. All right, let's get here and go here. All right, everybody should be seeing that now. That first slide. So the 5th word in the title is wholeness. An important thing to note about Masonry's view of wholeness is that it isn't just having all of the parts of something gathered together in one place. Because all the parts can be piled together and the thing itself not actually be present and fully functional. So, for example, when the Temple of King Solomon was complete, all parts are said to have fitted together with exact nicety. That fitting together turned a bunch of stones and timbers into a whole building consecrated for sacred purposes. That is how it became more than the sum of its parts, and that more than the sum of its parts is a hallmark of wholeness. We know the temple is a model for the lodge, and not only for the lodge room as a physical place, but for us as a group, the members who come together to make a whole social entity. This social entity is the actual lodge. Our ritual teaches we should work to ensure all parts of that social entity fit together with exact nicety, when it reminds us that peace and harmony is the chief strength and support of all well-regulated institutions, and more especially this of ours. That's the language in Texas. It may vary a little bit in your jurisdiction. But this analogy of the temple's wholeness does not stop with the lodge. We enter a deeper layer of symbolism when we consider that the temple, and thus the lodge, is also a model for each of us as an individual human being. Each of us is an assembly of parts, not only in the members and organs of our bodies, but also in our psyches or souls. We are physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual creatures all at the same time. Those are the 4 major elements of our individual being. And while they may all be present together, it takes only a little reflection to recall how they are not always fitted together with exact nicety, how peace and harmony among them can wane, even seem to totally disappear, and sometimes for excruciatingly long periods of time. We all know what that's like. We speak of being torn about something, of feeling conflicted, of being at odds with ourselves. Despite our best intentions otherwise, we can do or say things we wish we hadn't, or not do or not say things we wish we had. In such moments, we are more fragmented, less integrated, less whole. But the extent to which the different parts of an individual are working together in peace and harmony is the extent to which one is more whole, more than the sum of one's own parts. One thing inherent to this understanding of wholeness is that it is not an all or nothing condition. Rather, we can experience more or less wholeness from one moment to another. So our craft acknowledges that we have a natural desire for the peace and harmony of a more fully integrated and actualized wholeness in our lives, and it encourages us to pick up our tools and work toward fulfillment of that desire. And so we have come to the fourth word of our title, toward. It's important for us to keep in mind that we can always be working toward a greater wholeness, making general progress in it, but with the understanding that the work is never finished so long as we live in this world. We need to remember we are fallible human beings with minds that are simply incapable of fully grasping all the complexity and mystery of our own existence. We are going to make mistakes. We will inevitably grow tired, have moments of weakness, succumb to the effects of aging, and often simply fail to see and understand all of the relevant factors and consequences for many of our decisions and actions. Keeping these realities in mind is important because it helps to spare us from two follies that often befall people seeking to better themselves. One of those follies is the unnecessary and unhealthy self-loathing and self-punishment that typically goes hand in hand with unrealistic expectations of ourselves. The other folly is the grandiose delusion of having arrived at some degree of completion or perfection from which we can never fall. It's also very much worth noting that the less we plague ourselves with these follies, and the more accepting and understanding we are of our own humanity, then the more prepared we are to be accepting and compassionate with the humanity of others. Like the Temple of Solomon, the vision of existing in the wholeness of peace, harmony, and unity is meant to inspire us to do the best we can with what we have, to persevere in the work, and to renew our efforts when we fail, which includes learning from our experiences and making changes that reflect our hard-won wisdom. Arriving at the third word, we consider that Masonry provides us with a path to follow in this work, a way traveled by others who have gone before us. Furthermore, our tradition gives us many instructions about how to travel that path, complete with ancient landmarks and elder brethren to help us know where we are and how to better manage whatever we encounter. It's not practical to examine all the particulars of Masonry's traditional path in this moment, so I encourage you to take this idea of a path with you and apply it in your own experiences of Masonic symbolism. For now, let us construct a basic outline for how to travel that path as a three-step process that would be familiar to the craftsman of any trade. First, we must be aware of our materials, the parts that make up the whole of our being. Second, we must try to understand how the parts relate to each other, developing our comprehension of their proper relationships with each other. Third, we put our understandings in motion, initiating actual movement by experimenting with the parts and adjusting them and their relationships in order to more harmoniously integrate them together, to refine them further and further toward a state of exact nicety. By outlining this three-step process of awareness, understanding, and movement, we have arrived at contemplative, the second word in our title. Walking Masonry's path toward wholeness is a contemplative process, which is to say that it is one in which we are intentionally focusing our consciousness upon it. And we can amplify the process through contemplative practices like the art of memory, mindfulness, meditation, prayer, study, and dialogue. And while we don't have time tonight to go into much more detail about how to practice all those things in Masonry, going into such detail is precisely why I've been writing the books that I have. At last, we come to the first word. And I want to point out that I am not referencing other traditions like Hermeticism, Kabbalah, Rosicrucianism, or other esoteric traditions. I have studied and practiced such things for many years, and my Masonic experience has benefited from them. But the longer I have done this work, the more I have come to appreciate that these other traditions are not necessary pursuits for Masons wanting to get the most out of their Masonic experience. Masonry itself, as deeply as possible, we don't need other traditions and systems to unlock its esoteric mysteries. It is our own contemplative effort that is the key to unlocking those mysteries. So now let's reflect on how our craft encourages us to make such effort on its path toward wholeness. In fact, our tradition not only encourages, but strongly admonishes us to do so. I'm going to share some statements that are actually in the introduction to the Texas Monitor of the Lodge. Here's the first one. Initiation is to be attained only after real labor, deep study, profound meditation, extensive research, and a constant practice of those virtues which will open a true path to moral, intellectual, and spiritual illumination. Here's the second one. Masonry does not expound the truths concealed in her emblems. It displays the symbols and may give a hint here and there concerning some characteristic of its several meanings, but it must remain for the neophyte to search out for himself the more hidden significations. The third statement. The lodge is said to be opened on and not in a certain degree, in reference rather to the speculative than to the legal character of the meeting. Not that the members are to be circumscribed in the limits of a particular degree, but that they are met together to unite in contemplation on the symbolic teachings and divine lessons, to inculcate which is the particular object of that degree. And finally, he who would become an accomplished Mason must not be content merely to hear or even to understand the lectures, but must, aided by them, and then having, as it were, the way marked out for him, study, interpret, and develop these symbols for himself. Widely recorded in most Masonic monitors is this teaching on one of our principal tenets. Truth is a divine attribute and the foundation of every virtue. To be good and true is the first lesson we are taught in Masonry. On this theme, we contemplate, and by its dictates, endeavor to regulate our conduct. When explaining the special nature of speculative Masonry, our monitors say it leads the contemplative to view with reverence and admiration the glorious works of creation and inspires him with the most exalted ideas of the perfection of his divine creator. Our ancient brethren, in obedience to God's law, labored 6 days and rested on the seventh, thereby enjoying frequent opportunities to contemplate the glorious works of creation and to adore the great creator. In fact, the first words of the charge at the opening of a lodge are as follows. The ways of virtue are beautiful, knowledge is attained by degrees. Wisdom dwells with contemplation. There we must seek her. In his Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, the Masonic scholar Albert Mackey further clarifies the relevance of contemplation to Masonry when he writes, to contemplate is literally to watch and inspect the temple. The augur or prophet among the Romans, having taken his stand on the Capitoline Hill, marked out with his wand the space in the heavens he intended to consult. This space he called the templum, the Latin word for a designated or marked off area. The watching of the templum was called contemplating. Those who devoted themselves to meditation upon sacred subject assumed this title. Among the Freemasons, the word speculative is used as equivalent to contemplative. Mackey was right about these words, speculative and contemplative. The root of the word speculate is the same root for spectacles, the eyeglasses we use to see more clearly. Thus, at the time when our forebears began describing themselves as speculative Masons, speculative literally meant looking into the vast and deep possibilities of meaning in Masonic symbolism. Therefore, speculative was indeed equivalent in meaning to contemplative, and it should remain so for today's Mason. Now, it's important to understand that contemplation is not only deeper and more focused thinking about something, but also includes meditatively opening our hearts and minds to wisdom through intuition and inspiration. Recall how our legend says that Hiram Abiff would retire to pray in the unfinished Sanctum Sanctorum before drawing his designs upon the trestle board. Contemplation of this sort is a profoundly spiritual pursuit, and because our craft is religiously pluralistic and inclusive, we should consider the fact that contemplative practice is extolled by every great spiritual book and teacher in history. In the book of Psalms, King David says, "I commune with my heart and meditate and search my spirit." The Buddha is recorded as having said, "From meditation, wisdom arises, and without meditation, wisdom wanes." The Prophet Muhammad wrote, "Contemplation for 1 hour is better than formal worship for 60 years. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells his student Arjuna, "In the still mind, in the depths of meditation, the eternal self reveals itself." Lao Tzu, the patriarch of Taoism, taught this: "Attain utmost vacuity, hold fast to quietude. This reversion belongs to the eternal. To know the eternal is enlightenment." And Jesus of Nazareth said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you. Seek first the kingdom of heaven." So we can see that Masonry's contemplative path toward wholeness involves turning within ourselves to, 1, develop greater awareness of all our parts, physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. 2, use deep thinking, intuition, and inspiration to refine our understanding of the parts and how they can best integrate with each other. And 3, initiate movement through experimentation with the parts and by making adjustments among them as we learn and grow toward greater peace, harmony, and unity. So far, we have been focusing on the personal inner work of Masonry's contemplative path toward wholeness. That's an appropriate starting place because in our tradition, it is the internal and not the external that recommends a man to be made a Mason. Yet once we enter the lodge, we are constantly urged not only to work on ourselves for our own benefit, but also to work for the improvement of our relationships and society. In countless ways, our craft teaches us that wholeness is not only something we should work toward internally, but also externally because we are social beings. For example, let us recall this monitorial lesson on hearing from the Fellowcraft degree. And as I recite it, listen for the different parts and dimensions of our being, internal and external, that it addresses. Hearing is that sense by which we distinguish sounds and are capable of appreciating the agreeable charms of music. By it, we are enabled to enjoy the pleasures of society and reciprocally to communicate to each other our thoughts and intentions, our purposes and desires, and thus our reason is rendered capable of exerting its utmost power and energy. The wise and beneficent author of nature intended by the formation of this sense that we should be social creatures and receive the greatest and most important part of our knowledge from social intercourse with each other. For these purposes, we are endowed with hearing, that by a proper exertion of our rational powers, our happiness may be complete. Let's also revisit a portion of the Master Mason's monitorial lesson on the beehive, which says, "It might have pleased the great creator of heaven and earth to have made man independent of all other beings. But as dependence is one of the strongest bonds of society, mankind were made dependent on each other for protection and security, as they thereby enjoy better opportunities of fulfilling the duties of reciprocal love and friendship. Thus was man formed for social and active life, the noblest part of the work of God." These are just two of the ways Masonry reminds us that the internal elements of our individual being and the external aspects of our social being are interwoven and inseparable parts of an even greater wholeness we are working toward. So when we follow Masonry's contemplative path toward wholeness by trying to improve ourselves and our unity with others, by practicing awareness, understanding, and thoughtful movement within ourselves and in our relationships with others, what do we call that? Is there a single term aside from Masonry that sums it all up? I submit that the teaching on the beehive has actually already pointed to this question's answer by encouraging us to enjoy better opportunities for fulfilling the duties of reciprocal love and friendship. In short, the one word that best describes Masonry's contemplative path toward wholeness is love. Love is the great work that our craft repeatedly urges us to contemplatively engage both internally and externally. The importance of love in Masonry is punctuated by the fact that the very last tool presented to a Master Mason is the trowel, which spreads the cement of brotherly love and affection. But by this point in the Masonic journey, the new Master Mason has already been taught many other lessons about love. Let's review some of the more obvious ones. Soon after entering the lodge for initiation, the entered apprentice hears these words: "Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity." And what do those words describe if not a relationship among members so loving that they regard each other as brothers? The EA is taught about the three principal tenets of brotherly love, relief, and truth. And while the first tenet directly addresses love, both relief and truth are described in terms that emphasize their roles in loving relationships. Soon after being brought to light, the new EA is dramatically reminded about the importance of charity as it is expressed through relief. In learning about the covering of the lodge, the initiate is taught that the highest of the three theological virtues is charity, and that the infinite reaches of the lodge's symbolic form suggest the extent to which his own charity should reach. With all this emphasis on charity in our craft, we should take a moment to examine it more carefully. The English word charity comes from the Latin caritas, which was used in translation of the original Greek of the Apostle Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. We get our three theological virtues from the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians, which is an exposition on the nature of love and its supreme importance. It's the chapter that begins this way: "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I have become only sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could but have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned so I may boast, but have not love, it profits me nothing." At the end of that chapter, Paul says that after everything else fails, three things remain: faith, hope, and love. And then he clarifies that love is the greatest of the three. The Greek word he used for love in that chapter was agape, meaning selfless love, not just generosity. It was later translated into Latin as caritas, which was then translated in some English versions of the Bible as charity. Others rendered it more properly as love. In any case, it is clear that the theological virtue of charity is about more than generosity. It is about love in its wholeness. I strongly encourage you to read or reread 1 Corinthians 13 if you want to know more about the wholeness of this supreme Masonic virtue. Getting back to how our craft teaches about love, as stated before, the previous examples were some of the more obvious ones. But since we began with the last tool of the Master Mason, let's go a little deeper by contemplating the first tools of the entered apprentice. Consider the 24-inch gauge, teaching us to divide our time into a portion for our usations, a portion for service to God and distressed brethren, and a portion for refreshment and sleep. Here we can see three divisions of loving. The portion at work is done to seek wages that we may better provide and care for others and ourselves, which is a loving thing. It may also be that we see our vocations themselves as forms of loving service to others. The portion for service to God and distressed brethren is a demonstration of our love for both. And the portion for rest and refreshment is an act of love for ourselves as well as others by ensuring we have enough energy for the other two portions of the gauge. Regarding the lesson of the common gavel, it is very much a labor of love for ourselves and for others when we strive to divest ourselves of vices and superfluities. While they aren't tools in the physical sense, we should also consider things like the four cardinal virtues and the liberal arts and sciences. Each of them empowers us to be more loving of ourselves, other people, or the divine in some way. And the work of empowering ourselves with them is itself an act of love. All the way through every degree of Masonry, in every rite, every symbolic working tool, and every resource is an instrument of love, which is to say that each reminds us ways to be more loving in our actions, in how we manage our emotions, in the way we think, and in the way we relate to others and to the great architect of the universe. And it's very appropriate that Masonry teaches us these things in the symbolism and allegory of a craft, because a craft requires work. Taken as a whole, the great diversity of tools and resources on the Masonic path illustrates that love is much more than feelings like attraction and affection. And so it demands much more from us, including prudence, temperance, fortitude, justice, faith, and hope. Just like our souls, love is multidimensional. It can be experienced and expressed physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. One way this multidimensionality is demonstrated is by the fact that we can think loving thoughts and do loving things even when we don't feel loving in the moment. However, because the wholeness of love itself includes all the different ways we can experience and express it, the more we give ourselves to awareness, understanding, and moving with love through contemplative practices like meditation, the art of memory, prayer, and dialogue, then the more love facilitates our own wholeness, transforming us both internally and externally. Indeed, such contemplative practice is love in action. Now, when we talk about love, it's very easy to take the attitude that it's just a touchy-feely thing, all nicey nice and flowing naturally in warmth and coziness. But that's love, isn't it? The fact is that it can be very hard work, true labor to discipline ourselves to manage our emotions lovingly, to think loving thoughts, make loving decisions, take loving action, and respond with loving attitudes whether or not things are going as we would prefer. A commitment to live this way is hardly always easy and pleasant, and we all know that. Masonry's contemplative path toward wholeness, our loving craft, can be arduous, and so it is meant for grown-up adults who are willing to give themselves to the heroic quest of transformation into stronger, wiser, and more beautiful, loving elders. It is not a mere pastime for people unwilling to be free thinkers and outgrow lesser notions about who and what they are. Mature adults know that love presents us with challenges and conflicts, such as when we deeply care about people or things that clash with each other. Love brings us struggle, frustration, disappointment, grief, and regret, in addition to all the beautiful, sweet, and thrilling things of life. And we ought to remember that truth every time we see or speak of our checkered pavement. But in coming to terms with the diverse and complex nature of love and learning that love is always present, that love flows through both the pleasant and unpleasant moments of life, we can discover one of the great mysteries about love, its transcendence. Love has no opposite that can overcome it. Though we often speak of fear or hate as the opposite of love, we should note that these are the names of feelings. And as we have, love is much more than a feeling. We can feel fear or hate and still think and do loving things despite those feelings. So love itself in its fullness is both ever and transcendent, which is to say, it is divine. As has been affirmed by the saints and sages of many faiths, love is therefore not only Masonry's path toward internal and external wholeness, it is the very essence of the peace, harmony, and unity that our craft holds up as the ideal for human existence at all levels. In other words, love is at once the destination of our path, the traveling of our path, and the path itself. Love is our work. Love is our wage. Love is our mystic tie. Given this realization, the ever-present questions for us are about how committed we are to work at Masonry's craft of love and fully engage its contemplative path toward wholeness in love. So in closing, I invite you to join me in asking these questions of ourselves. How willing are we to keep looking for deeper awareness of ourselves and our relationships with others and with the divine? How willing are we to keep striving for a better understanding of these things? How willing are we to keep moving in the most loving of ways? Thank you very much for traveling with me in this exploration of Masonry's contemplative path toward wholeness, and I look forward to some conversations.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. 1 second, let me use my other. And Brother Chuck, that was excellent. That was an amazing presentation. I'm gonna unmute if anybody has a question they want to ask brother, you can unmute yourself and go ahead and start speaking.
Hey, Brother Chuck, well done.
Thank you.
My question is, when we're talking about wholeness, how would you describe wholeness? What really is that? It's something we talk about a lot, but do we have a definition for it?
Yeah, ultimately, it's one of those things that's mysterious, because the way I've defined wholeness in this lecture is the integration of our physical qualities, our emotional qualities, our intellectual qualities, and our spiritual qualities. Well, as soon as we say our spiritual qualities, that opens up a Pandora's box of mysteries. And different traditions have different answers to what all that refers to and what all is included in the spiritual aspect of our being. Ultimately, one of the points that I intend to make here in this presentation is that we are mysteries to ourselves, and embracing the mystery of our own self is a huge, huge part of embracing the mystery of existence. And so that's a key movement in moving further and further toward wholeness. But because wholeness is defined in a way that includes things that transcend our ability to intellectually understand, we have to admit that ultimately we can't really explain what wholeness is. Sorry. Sorry, Brother Judge, but I'm not surprised that you asked that question.
Oh, thank you.
I have a question, or more of a statement that I want to make. So one thing I noticed is that you made the mention of how you've engaged in numerous studies with some of the kind of related kindred arts of Masonry, like the Kabbalah and so on. But you also emphasize the point that Masonry in of itself is almost its own complete system for achieving those similar. And could you just speak a little bit more about that? Because I think a lot of times we almost look to supplement or complement or like substitute things for Masonry, whereas I kind of believe where you believe where the system is kind of complete in itself.
Yeah, I think, and I'm speaking from my own experience here about why I dove into a lot of these other esoteric traditions, and still do, by the way. I'm not saying we shouldn't do them. I'm just saying that it's not necessary. So one of the reasons we do that is because for a very long time, we have not been encouraged to contemplate deeply on the symbols and rituals of Masonry, to speculate, interpret, to seek through intuition and inspiration the deepest possible meanings of what we're saying and what we're doing. If we had been willing to do that as a fraternity all of these centuries and produce literature and word of mouth being passed on in an oral tradition about what was discovered through those processes, then we wouldn't be needing to look to other traditions to suggest interpretations for us now. We don't need to look now either. I promise you that the more deeply you meditate on things and the more you open yourself up to possibilities of meaning, then the more riches you will discover in the Masonic tradition, and you don't need to compare and contrast with other traditions to do that. It's just, and another reason why we go to other traditions is because other traditions have preserved the technologies of going within ourselves, of doing that deep inner work of interpretation, of opening to inspiration and intuition. They have methods of meditation and contemplation that facilitate that. And by the way, there was a time when, I mean, if we look at the Shaw statutes of 1599, William Shaw, the master of work for the craft in Scotland, says that every entered apprentice and fellow craft will be tested in the art of memory. And he wasn't talking about rote memorization. He was talking about what is often referred to as the hermetic art of memory, the idea that we can not only memorize things, but deeply engage them in a way that reveals more meaning to us. So I guess those are my comments in response to yours, Kofi.
You read my mind.
I have a question.
Okay.
Would you say that the memorization, because as parents can memorize plenty.
Okay, Daniel, you broke up on me there, and I couldn't quite understand what you were asking. I know it was about memorization.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So as we all learn the art of memory, would you say that let me just turn my camera on. Okay. Would you say that being able to interpret what it is that you're memorizing is a valid part and source of the work?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the things in the classic art of memory that happens is you're not only trying to store things in your memory, but you're trying to make connections between the things that you store and other ideas, other concepts, other beliefs, so that that unfolds more potential meaning for whatever it is that you place in your memory. So absolutely, that process of speculation and interpretation is one of the ways that we make those connections. And that should be part of memory work in Masonry, if we want to get the most out of that experience.
I have a question. In some contemplative groups, they have a practice called Lectio Divina. It's where they
Yes.
read scripture and what I'm wondering about, that seems like a contemplative practice. Now, if we were to do that with the rituals and the things that we have memorized in Masonry, you're expecting, similar to Lectio Divina, that things will come out of that from a spiritual component.
Yes, absolutely.
And it would help us become more whole as a group.
Yes, yes, as individuals and as a fraternity, that would move us towards greater wholeness.
Now, I have one more question, if I could ask.
Yeah.
I've been reading that in some of the, I'm not a Mason, I should say up front. I'm hoping to become it after the lodges come back together. Then we can actually have a meeting.
All right.
In some of the ritual, you actually take a physical position to make squares or triangles. And I was wondering, would that count as the integration of these symbols and numbers as a physical contemplation? I don't know, maybe I'm not making myself clear.
No, you have made yourself clear, at least to me. I follow you. And I agree that, yes, movement is one of the ways that we integrate with our symbols. So absolutely. I think you've raised two very good things there. About kind of a moving meditation as it's expressed through ritual, right, and Lectio Divina, both wonderful practices. In fact, in the book, The Art and Science of Initiation, I was asked to contribute a chapter to that. And in that chapter, I write about contemplative practices that we can be doing to enhance our experience of ritual initiation. And
could you give that book again? Oh,
yeah,
sorry. Could you give the name of that book again, please?
Yeah, The Art and Science of Initiation.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you for two wonderful questions. And I look forward to you becoming a brother.
Well, I'm excited, but we have to pause while we have the virus out.
Yes, of course.
So.
Hey, Chuck, it's me, Renee. How's it going?
Hi, Renee. Always good to hear from you. Always.
So are you familiar with, because I know that some of the Hermeticists from back then, like Raymond Lull, Giordano Bruno, all these guys, and they created a memory wheel.
Yes.
And they, Giordano Bruno was very heavy. And I've noticed that most of them were very heavy on memory. That was their thing. And they used to create a mansion. I think Giordano Bruno would describe a mansion of words to create these images. And he wrote a few books on that. And are you familiar with The Wheel of Memory by Giordano Bruno?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've read up on the Wheel of Memory. I'm more familiar with the idea of memory palaces. You were referring to mansions, memory palaces. And the idea there is actually something that they knew back then, but has been borne out by scientific research in the last century. And that is that we remember things more effectively when we can connect them with space, with something in space, in the three dimensions of space. And so what a memory palace is either we memorize the form of some actual structure, or we create a structure in our minds, one of the two. And then within that structure, we go around and we associate certain ideas and certain symbols with different places in that structure. And that helps us not only recall them, but it helps with creating a kind of filing cabinet in which different things are in similar places or closely related to each other. I can't remember the name of the philosopher off the top of my head who created this, but he created essentially a kind of amphitheater. And he even built a little model of it that he could put up to his eyes and look at it as if it were a three-dimensional structure. So this helped him create the memory of this structure in his mind. And each level and each row of the amphitheater and each seat of the amphitheater was associated with something different. He had it organized according to the planets. And then associated with the planets were all of these different ideas and things. And the wheel works in a similar way, is that it just provides a kind of a visual structure that can be memorized to then show how different things can relate to each other and be rearranged and so on.
Like the deacons, right? Like I know they were using astrological deacons and stuff for certain memory stuff, or like in a circle, like as you were saying.
Yeah,
Giordano Bruno, yeah,
the decans. Yeah, all kinds. I mean, Bruno was a heavy esoteric dude. Yeah. And he was putting together all kinds of deep correlations. And one of the things that Bruno discovered is that through this kind of work, unexpected things would happen as you're in your imagination and you are contemplating something and remembering something, that unexpected things can happen and suddenly a new insight comes. Yes. It seems to come from nowhere. And that is an important spiritual experience that is available to all of us and would really enrich our Masonic experiences if we would practice it.
That's a great explanation. Thank you for that.
You're very welcome. Thank you for asking.
Hey,
this
Chuck?
may be an odd question. Sorry.
Who said, "Hey, Chuck"?
It's Kofi.
Oh.
So the philosopher you was thinking about is Julio Camillo and his theater of memory.
That's right. That's Camillo. That's right.
Yep. Sorry, I just wanted to add that for you.
Oh, I'm glad you did that. A really good book about this. Somebody has just put it on there, Giordano Bruno and the Art of Memory. There's another one, Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition is another one. That's Francis Yates.
Yeah, and I think he has a rare one called The Circle of Circes. It's very rare though. He has one called The Circle of Circes, but Francis Yates has most of his stuff.
Yeah.
Brother Chuck, as some of us have physical disabilities, such as color blindness,
yes,
I'm sure we have, in a like manner, mental blindness. So how do you discover whether, in effect, you're running the wrong path?
Yeah, that's a
mental blindness.
Really good question. Some people do have problems with imagery. And so I want to make clear that while we're talking about imagery pretty heavily here so far, that's not the only way to get deep contemplation into things. For some people, it's the sounds of words that are the things that most directly work in their mental processes, that it's sound is the thing that they really connect with. Music, the sounds of words, the tones of voices, and so on. And so, for example, when some people memorize Masonic ritual, it's the words themselves that they really have the most success with. But when other people memorize Masonic ritual, they have to connect those words with images, with remembering where they were in the lodge at different times. And so these things work differently for different individuals, which is not to say that most of us can't develop in these skills. It's like none of us is just going to, very few of us anyway, are just going to pick up a violin and be really skilled at playing the violin immediately. In fact, most of us, if we picked up the violin and didn't know that we could get lessons or training in it and we tried to play it, we would think, "Ooh, I'm just making a horrible noise. I'm not touching this thing anymore. I can't do this." Well, that can be the same kind of experience that some people have with some of these contemplative experiences, is that in the initial stages, it can feel awkward. It can even sometimes feel impossible. But then with time, they begin to unfold. Still, different strengths for different people. And it's important to know those things. It's a great question, Brother Mel. Thank you.
I have kind of an elementary question. Recently, I've discovered carpets.
Yes.
Now, I should explain what I mean by that is that, for instance, for each of the first steps of Masonry, they have symbols, they have spiral staircases. These are images that are mysterious.
Yes.
Now, when those are looked at and studied, can that be considered a type of contemplation where you're connecting thoughts and pieces with it?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And noticing the arrangement of those elements on the carpets, trestle boards, tracing boards, where they are in relationship with each other, and asking yourself, why is that? And why is that thing designed in the particular way that it is designed, each little element? Those are all wonderful ways of doing contemplative work in Masonry. In fact, I'm going to be giving another talk in a couple of weeks to a lodge in California on specifically on the use of imagery, that kind of Masonic imagery.
Where in California? Because I'm from California.
Santa Monica Lodge, I think, is the name of the lodge.
Down south. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Very good. Thank you. All righty. Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Chuck.
Yes.
So you made a mention about also going back to Masonic technologies that we've lost.
Yes.
So in a way, you're kind of bringing back some of those either lost technologies or developing new technologies as well. Would you say that it's almost incumbent on each Mason to develop tools, tactic, technologies on their own, which we then bring to the larger audience and share with each other?
Yeah, I really like that idea. I mean, you know, in other traditions, they have long histories of working with certain techniques, and they've got it, you know, they've to a greater or lesser extent kind of regimented about what techniques you learn, how you learn them, and in what order you learn them, and how often you do them, and that sort of thing. That doesn't exist in Masonry. And so we have this wonderful, wide open freedom. We're kind of like the Wild West of esotericism, in a sense, when it comes to these contemplative technologies. They're all available to us. And so you're absolutely right. One of the things that I have attempted to do with my first book was to take a variety of different methods and techniques from my own rich background of practices. And as I experimented with them in the Masonic context, discovering which ones I thought were particularly helpful and revelatory, not only for me, but for other people that I worked with a long time ago. And so I would encourage more brothers to be doing that sort of thing. So if you're familiar with some sort of a practice, of a contemplative, meditative practice that you've had success with in some other arena, don't hesitate to apply it within the Masonic context and tell your brothers about what your experience is like. Now I realize in some places you might have to be careful about who you talk to, and it's not necessarily a thing that you want to start preaching about in some lodges. I mean, I definitely understand that. But one of the benefits of the internet now, of course, is that we have the opportunity to find more like-minded brothers that we can share those interests with, and compare notes with each other, and teach each other different kinds of methods. What I envision now, just to play off of that one more thing, what I envision is that, I don't know, 100 years from now, wouldn't it be great if this was just part of every Mason's experience, to the wanted to get into it, there was this rich body of inner technology, of contemplative and meditative techniques and supportive literature that would be available to any brother that wanted it to develop himself and to develop his presence in the world and his relationships with others. I think that's a beautiful vision for our fraternity. And I actually think it's one that is entirely fitting for our fraternity. One that our fraternity urges us to consider.
What would be your suggestions to a brother who has heard what you said and wants to start taking the first steps towards that goal? Just a regular brother. He's been a master mason for 1 year. You know, he's enjoyed masonry, but he's looking for that more. You know,
right.
But he wants to keep it within the Masonic plane. You know, before he starts searching out to everything, and he wants to begin.
Okay.
What would be your advice to him?
All right. 2 things. The first is making me laugh a little bit. Get my book. You know, that's one thing. But there's also a new resource in Masonry that I was instrumental in helping to create and have been helping to develop. There's an organization. It's not really an organization. It's a group of brothers that came together with this vision. And it's called the Masonic Legacy Society. And so if you'll look at masoniclegacysociety.org, you'll find that you can get free access to a document about a basic approach to contemplative practice in Masonry that anybody can do. This document is available to Masons and non-Masons alike. It's free. And it took us about 2 years, this committee of people that came together under the leadership of Akram Elias, past Grand Master of Washington, D.C. It took us about 2 years to finally refine that document and then to develop supporting documents. Like we've got a guide for facilitators and to create a training program. So we do a training program for anybody that wants to become a facilitator of this contemplative method that we have put together. And that training process itself is also free. It's a 2 full day training that we currently do online. We've done several of these. And I've done a lot of professional training in my career. All of my background as a professional trainer has been put into the design of this training, and not just mine. We've got other guys that bring specialties, other career specialties into the mix that have made this an excellent training that we are constantly refining as we get feedback from those who go through it. And our feedback has been wonderfully positive. We've also gotten some good constructive feedback and criticism about how we could make things even better along the way. And so it just keeps getting better and better. I would encourage anybody that's interested in learning more about this stuff to do those 2 things. Check out the Masonic Legacy Society and get my book.
Well, what's the name of your book, brother?
It's Contemplative Masonry, Basic Applications for Mindfulness, Basic Applications of Mindfulness, Meditation, and Imagery for the Craft. You can find that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I think it's even at Half Price Books now. Yeah, one thing I'll say about that is that it still amazes me that after the hundreds of years that our fraternity has existed, a book on actually how to do this inner work in the Masonic context, specifically applied to Masonry, nobody had ever done that before. And look, I'm not a particularly brilliant human being. It's not like it was just one of those things that because of my work in learning about contemplative practice, and knowing that all these other traditions had lots of literature, it was hard for me to believe that nobody had ever done that before. And I hope that that it has kickstarted something that'll be way, way, way bigger than me.
Hey, Chuck, I just wanted to say the Masonic, the Society organization. Yes, I'm very familiar because some of those brothers actually contacted me privately.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think it's September. I think we're going to be doing one, I believe.
That's right. There will be a training
Yes.
in September.
Yes, of September. So yeah, so that would be interesting. I don't know if you would be in there. I think you would be in there, right?
I remember, if I remember correctly, that training is on the 11th and 12th, and I'm not
Yes.
going to be available for the 11th, at least
Okay.
not the whole time. And so I won't have as active a role in that training as I have had in the past. My work has now kind of gotten me obligated on Fridays, and so I'm not going to be as free to do those trainings as I had been.
Oh, okay. Well, I was wishing you were, but it's okay. Next time.
Well, believe me, brothers, there are plenty of fellows
Yeah.
that are involved with that effort that are doing fantastic jobs in that training.
They're doing great, actually, all of them.
Yes, they are.
Hi, Brother Chuck. This is Brother Adrian. How you doing?
All right, Brother Adrian, how are you, man?
All right, all right. Yeah, you mentioned, and I've always thought that's very conspicuous that Freemasonry has lacked method for so many years, and I used to kind of blame Masonry. You know, it's like why isn't there no method? You know, why tell me just do this? You know, do that. And I kind of came to peace with that, and I realized one day that I think it has to do with the spirit of Freemasonry, not being partisan in any way.
Yeah.
Not espousing any particular dogma, any particular practice.
Yes.
And kind of leaving it up to each particular brother and their particular interpretation and whatever, you know, inkling you want to take, whether it's meditative, contemplative, whether it's religious, whether it's not secular, you know.
Yes.
One of these, you know. And when I realized that, I said, well, maybe it's not so bad after all, you know, because just imagine if, and I'm a avid meditator. Just imagine if everybody would be telling me, you gotta meditate, you gotta meditate, you gotta meditate, you gotta meditate. You know, it's like, oh, you know.
Yeah. Wonderful points, brother. I'm not advocating for this being a requirement in the Masonic experience. I know that there are some lodges that use my book as an educational tool from the moment they have a candidate all the way through their craft degrees. But I'm not advocating for this to be a requirement. One of the reasons for that, and I know you'll resonate with this, Adrian, is that when we listen to our ritual about what it is that makes a Mason, there's just one thing that makes a man a Mason, and that's the obligation. And that leaves a lot of room for how each of us lives up to our obligation and fulfills our obligation. And I wouldn't want to change that at all. I want to meet on the level with brothers who they don't care about this contemplative stuff. They're all about being there in good fellowship, warm, caring, having a good time together. That's wonderful. I love those brothers. I'm one of those brothers too. But I also have these contemplative interests. Yeah, I want it all.
Good evening, Ms. Hervé.
Brother?
Question, not a brother, no.
No, you're not. Okay.
No. So the gentleman before me spoke about method. I want to know, is there like a how-to for deep contemplation? Is there an approach that you can take, that you can teach?
Yeah. Both of the sources that I have talked about tonight, the Masonic Legacy Society has a document called Practicing the Art of Our Mysteries, is a how-to document. And my book is a how-to book. It's not just theory. It's not just interpretation. It's an actual how-to book.
Got it. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And Chuck, this is Kofi again. And just to piggyback off what you were saying, what Adrian was saying, is that it's almost like how you have in different religions. Like I'm Catholic, but in Catholicism, we have they say different ways to practice and serve. So you have different spiritualities, different spiritualism. Like you
Spiritual
have Ignatius,
gifts.
exactly. You know,
Yes.
and you have that in a lot of other different religions as well too. And I kind of feel in Masonry, that's something that we don't cultivate enough. You know, sometimes we try to say things have to be either or, instead of saying that we're developing these various paths that brothers can take to walk on to achieve their certain goals as well. So a brother like you is doing marvelous work, you know, building up something that's going to take us to like the next 100 years, building up the technology. And that's for brothers who are interested in walking that contemplative path. Whereas another brother might just be into the fraternal social aspect of it, and it'll be perfectly okay for him. But that other brother still has the tools and technologies available to him in order to engage in those activities.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were saying that, Kofi, someone posted a chat that just briefly flashed on my screen. I don't have my chat window open, but I see the little notifications. And somebody made the comment that, you know, the goal of Masonry is to make good men better. Remember that. And that's what we're talking about. And there are lots of different ways that we can make ourselves better men and help each other become better men. And the more tools we have for that, the better. And we're all about tools in Masonry, aren't we?
Okay, gentlemen and ladies.
A question more. Yeah, just a real quickly. You had mentioned, you know, there's individuals who particularly partake in more of the fellowship aspect as opposed to the tenets that are laid for all of us to grow on. Would you say that throughout the years, Masonry has become watered down through bad teachings? I don't know if it's something that we, I would assume that, you know, as you climb the ladder and you move up, there's certain informational material.
Oh, I think we lost you. I'll just respond then to as much as we got there. So two thoughts occur to me, and one is my friend Bob Davis in his book. He's got a book on manhood in Masonry. He talks about how the fraternity changes and shifts to meet the demands of each new generation. That is a normal part of the fraternity. That's one of the reasons why the fraternity has lasted as long as it has, is because it has been able to adapt to meet the needs of each generation. And for a while now, the previous generations have not really been interested in a lot of the deeper aspects of what our ritual talks about, what our symbolism offers. What brothers were looking for was the fraternal, the community involvement, service work. Those were the things that the brothers were looking for in the fraternity. So those were the things they emphasized. Those were the things they taught to each other. Those were the things that they built in their work with each other. And as a result, it just naturally follows that some of the other possibilities of the fraternity kind of waned, kind of took a back seat. And sometimes maybe even some negative attitudes were developed towards some of those other aspects and brothers interested in those other aspects. But the tides have shifted. Society as a whole needs different things from this generation of men, from the current generations of men. Society as a whole needs different things. Society needs men, and men are feeling the need themselves to be more aware of all of the different aspects of their being, to be more whole, to be more understanding in everything that they do, and to penetrate into some of these mysteries about the virtues and why, you know, we're here in this existence, and dealing with it, what we can be building. There's a psychological and spiritual level of our being that needs more attention in our times. And so Masonry is answering that, maybe not as quickly as some of us would like, but the change is happening. And I'm really glad to see it. I'm very encouraged that as I, before COVID, traveled around the country talking to different groups, and now talking with different groups online the way that I've been doing, I'm very encouraged to see how many more Masons are looking for that wholeness that I was talking about tonight. They want the whole big picture of what Masonry has to offer. And where it's not being offered, they are creating it. They're making it happen. And I'm just so thrilled to see that. It's a big shift from when I entered the fraternity 32 years ago.
Greetings, Brother Dunning. Can you hear me?
Yes, Brother Haynes.
Hi, this is Brother Caleb Haynes. I just had a quick question, and I think it might touch on some of the other comments that other brothers have presented, and even some of our aspiring brethren. I was wondering if you could just touch base briefly on rites and the difference of rites and traditions that we have. If we're not to look outside of our Masonic traditions, there's certainly diversity there within.
Yes.
And perhaps some of the brethren are questioning or wondering, and not quite too clear about the diversity that can be between lodges that practice a certain rite, even if they're the same rite from lodge to lodge, but perhaps some of the differences that the appendant bodies offer.
Yeah. I'll dip a toe in there, Brother Caleb, but as you know, that could be an entire presentation or lecture series in itself. So,
yes, sir.
So just very quickly, here in the United States, once you become a Master Mason, then you have two major options if you want to have more initiatic experiences, more Masonic material offered to you to work with. One is the Scottish Rite, and the other is the York Rite. And the Scottish Rite actually even has two divisions. One is the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, and then the other is the Southern jurisdiction. And the Southern jurisdiction has been the one that most closely preserves the rituals of the 32 degrees of the Scottish Rite as they have been done in the past, whereas the Northern Masonic jurisdiction has allowed innovation in the development of new rituals. And so there's been a significant difference developing between the experience that those two divisions of the Scottish Rite offer. In the York Rite, there are actually three bodies within the York Rite. There is the chapter of the Holy Royal Arch, there's the Cryptic Council, and then there is the commandery for the Knights Templar. And it has like three different orders of knighthood within it. The Scottish Rite really is focused more on, especially in the Southern jurisdiction, is focused more on study of comparative religion and philosophy. It looks at many of the ancient traditions of the ancient mystery traditions of Egypt, of Greece, and their relevance to what we experience in Masonry. It looks at traditions of knighthood as well. And the idea there is, the Scottish Rite calls itself the University of Freemasonry. And the idea is that Scottish Rite Masonry is really especially designed for those people that are interested, those brothers that are interested in really plunging into the philosophical aspects of Masonry. The York Rite is, the flavor of the York Rite is really more along the lines of Judeo-Christian spirituality. And it up with a kind of experience of initiation that is closer to what the Blue Lodge is like in the United States. The language is the same. The way the ritual is conducted is very similar. Whereas in the Scottish Rite, it's a theatrical performance. You actually sit and watch a play that is allegorical and metaphorical. In the York Rite, the degrees are very much like what you would experience in the Blue Lodge. And a lot more of the history, traditional history, mythical history of the temple, King Solomon's temple, plays out in the chapter and council degrees of the York Rite. And then, of course, the Commandery Knights Templar is very much what it sounds like. It's focused on Christian knighthood and how that's relevant to Masonic experience. So if you're not a professed Christian, or for some reason you aren't comfortable professing Christianity as a condition of a membership in a Masonic organization, chapter and council is as far as you might go in the York Rite. In the Scottish Rite in the United States, there is no religious requirement beyond what you've already established in the Blue Lodge. We study teachings from all the great religions: Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Zoroastrianism has a presence in Scottish Rite ritual. You'll even find some references to the Vedas, so the ancient traditions coming out of India. Those are the two main ones. There's also the Allied Masonic degrees, which is a collection, an organization that maintains a collection of degrees that have kind of come and gone. They're not a standard part of Masonic experience like they might have been when they were first developed. And so that's more of a kind of a scholarly organization where people write papers, they study degrees and rituals and write papers about them and do presentations. And so if you're really interested in the scholarly side of things, that's a great organization to belong to. And I'll kind of stop there because, like I said before, we could keep going on and on and on with some of this stuff. There are so many different appendant bodies. One of the things that I'll say in closing on this issue is that I hold pretty closely to this idea that what these other degrees, these other rites and degrees offer is elaboration on the first three degrees, on the craft degrees, that they will help you understand more deeply what you experience in those first three degrees, but they're not in essence going to give you anything that you couldn't already find in terms of the real meaning of those first three degrees, about what those first three degrees are capable of facilitating in your life. You're not going to get more. You're just going to get elaboration and insight and opportunities to see things from different points of view.
Thank you, brother.
It's a great question, considering especially that we have some prospective Masons in the group here.
Chuck, I have a quick question to ask you.
All right, Kofi.
What would you suggest for non-Masons that are currently listening to this and we're wanting to engage in some contemplative practices and activities on their own? Because, you know, not everybody wants to, you know, improve their life and become a Mason. You know,
yeah.
Some people don't. Some people have. Everybody wants to walk their own path.
Sure.
And so somebody's probably on the call, not a Mason, has heard you, has been inspired by the stuff you said, wants to put some of the things you have into action, but they're not Masons, what would you suggest to them? First, get the book.
Yeah, you kind of zinged me on that one, didn't you? No, I have some other books in mind. And I'm trying to remember the titles of them, but one book is, if you're particularly interested in imagery, there's a book called Seeing with the Mind's Eye. It's an older book, but it's actually one of the first books I ever got on meditation. And it's all about working with imagery. So that's a fantastic book to pick up on that. And hold on a second here. Let me see if I can find the title of this other book that I have in mind. I've got to dig into my files on my computer here. All right, it's coming up. So 2 more books that I would recommend for you. One is The Meditative Mind, Varieties of Meditative Experience by Daniel Goleman, G-O-L-M-A-N. I'm actually going to give you 3 more books. Another one is Self-Hypnosis, The Complete Manual for Health and Self-Change. So that's a good book for, like, if you're working on self-improvement, then self-hypnosis is a good technology for that. And then finally, kind of what is now a classic text in mindfulness: Wherever You Go, There You Are, Mindfulness Meditation in Everyday Life by Jon Kabat-Zinn. So just to review those titles again: The Meditative Mind, Varieties of Meditative Experience by Daniel Goleman. Seeing with the Mind's Eye by Michael Samuels and Nancy Samuels. Self-Hypnosis, The Complete Manual for Health and Self-Change by Allman and Lambrou, L-A-M-B-R-O-U. And Wherever You Go, There You Are, Mindfulness Meditation in Everyday Life by Jon Kabat-Zinn. I think those 4 books will give you a pretty comprehensive introduction and some really good instruction in 4 different contemplative approaches. Actually, the Meditative Mind, Varieties of Meditative Experience, kind of covers a gamut, with the other 3 books really focused more on particular technologies.
That is excellent. So it's already 8:35. Minds are stimulated. We're gonna wrap this up. Anybody has one last question that they want to ask, they can ask it now or hold their peace.
Hey, Kofi, this is Rick up in Syracuse.
Hey, Rick.
How's it going, brother?
I'm doing good. How you been?
Good. I'm good. And I've got Brother Chuck speaking to our Rosicrucian group on Saturday. And so my question is, because I'm a librarian, Chuck, I know there was a follow-up book that was mentioned a while back. Is that still in the works, or has it evolved into something different?
No, I turned over the manuscript over a year ago to my publisher, and my publisher the last thing I heard from him is he said it would be out this summer. We've got about a month of summer left. And so I'm hopeful that it'll be out within a month. And it's The Contemplative Lodge, a manual for Masons doing inner work together.
Great. Look forward to it, and look forward to seeing you on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well.
Great. Thank you, and thank you, Kofi.
Always great to hear from you, Rich.
Yeah.
Okay, Raphael, I'm going to ask you to start your video and to send us off.
Hello. Sorry, my brothers. I'm still on the road. Got drenched, so I had to change. Brother Chuck, that was awesome. I was able to actually listen to it. Um, it was definitely great. I'm gonna get your book. I haven't gotten your book, but I am definitely going to get your book. Everyone, just be safe. Uh, Enjoy the rest of the evening, and make sure to tune in to our two parts of the following lectures, which Kofi, because I'm driving, can you please
I'll
let
take over.
everyone know?
I'll take over Raphael. See,
Thank you.
Raphael's not too tall, so he can't even really reach the steering wheel so well. So we always assist him and everything like that. So yeah, so everybody, thank you for definitely coming out. Brother Chuck, that was amazing. I mean, the perfect first lecture. I told Brother Chuck that I actually, when I first read his book, I thought he was a author from the early 1900s. So when I found out he was actually alive, I was like, oh, this is even better. I can actually still talk to you. Personally, you gave me a lot to think about, and I'm hoping you gave everybody else that's on this meeting a lot to think about. It's been a wonderful pleasure. And like I said, we have a 3-stop journey into the Masonic mind. Brother Chuck led us off, talked about his contemplative Masonry. Next week, I'm going to talk about Masonic mind control, talking about subduing your passions and just controlling your attention and resisting the temptation. A lot of stuff that Brother Chuck talked about today directly impacts what I'm going to be talking about tomorrow, because meditation, contemplation, all these are things to control your different mental and emotional states. So it's very, very important. They all work hand in hand together. Again, thank you for coming out. If you registered for this lecture, you should be able to use it for next week's lecture. If there's any problems, we'll make sure to email you. The recording of this, we will send it out to you once we get the recording and send it to you. And everybody, thank you. Have a great night. Stay safe. And Brother Chuck, thank you once again.
My pleasure. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Kofi and Chuck.
No problem, brother. Hey, Matt, good to see you.
It's nice to be seen. Yes, thank you. I know somebody that would benefit from this. He was just asking such questions.
This is excellent. Jim, good to see you. Good to see you, Jim.
See you, Kofi.
Look forward to the recording.
It's going to be amazing. This was some very interesting information. I loved it.
Yeah, great work. Great work.
Thank you, Brother Chuck. This was so incredible and well beyond my capabilities to comprehend in one sitting. So I am looking forward to the recording. 3 or 4, maybe 5 times through it. I might do some of it. But thank you for bringing it to us.
My pleasure.
We might have to have a part 2 with Chuck.
Have a blessed evening, all.
You too, brother.
Thank you,
Brother
brothers.
Mati,
Have a good evening.
you too. Chuck, good to see you. Brother Mati, thanks for joining us as well.
Good night.
All right. I'm checking out. Good night, everybody.
Later, Brother Donnie.
Good night, Chuck.